Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. But if you are one of the new people, my name is Carla and I make videos about how I show up for myself in hopes of inspiring you to do the same. Showing up for yourself is the motto that I've lived by since 2020, and it's helped me to lose over half my original body weight, 183 pounds, transform my mental health, completely change careers, and basically it has threaded through every single aspect of my life. And there is one concept within my showing up for yourself motto or ethos that has really resonated with me and has helped to change everything, and that is self-compassion. This is part 3 of my self-compassion series. In part 1, I mentioned how self-compassion started to change things for me. And in part 2, I talk specifically about the role that self-compassion can have and can play in a weight loss journey. And this is part 3. And part 3 today, what I'm going to be chatting to you about is how you can, tips that you can implement to help to create a more self-compassionate life for yourself and help to create a better or more kind and compassionate relationship with yourself. Before I get into the specific 7 tips that I have, there are 2 kind of overall things that I just overarching ideas that I want to really hone in because they are so important. The first is that when you decide to live a more self-compassionate life, it is a gradual journey. It is not a flip a switch and everything just becomes, happy-go-lucky, self-compassionate, we're all kind, self-caring, some kind of guru. That's not real life. Maybe that happens for some people, but for the vast majority of us, and if you're anything like me, you don't decide necessarily to become self-compassionate and then wake up tomorrow morning and you just are. It is a gradual practice that takes time, it takes energy, it takes work at doing. Like anything else that is worth doing, it takes work, but it is a gradual process. We spend most of our lives, if you're anything like me, being incredibly critical of ourselves, and being critical can be our default state for the way we speak to ourselves. So to decide to become self-compassionate and turn that around, it's not very realistic and it's not very relatable. For me and for most people, self-compassion is a journey. It is a road that we walk down, and hopefully the further we travel, the further we get towards a more self-compassionate life. But I also want to state part 2, or number 2 in this kind of like overarching idea, is that the first is that self-compassion is gradual, but also that even if we are on a road or on a journey, self-compassion is not a destination. It is not a static thing. Self-compassion is transient. It is ever flowing and ever changing, and there are external factors and there are internal factors, and there are things that happen to us that make self-compassion easier and make self-compassion more difficult. And this happens to me all the time. As this is a journey, with any journey, there are peaks and troughs, there are hills and valleys that we have to come across, and challenges that we have to overcome, and mountains we have to climb. And that is the way it is with self-compassion. So that it is, while it is not a destination, it is not a static single point that we get to that never changes. We can become self-compassionate and have a more self-compassionate life, and we can ebb back into a more self-critical voice for a period of time, and then we can come back out of that and become even more self-compassionate, and then we can flow back in to being more self-critical, or to be self-critical again, and then flow back out of it. And this is going to happen. It is transient. It is not a stationary or static position. So please just remember that if you are wanting to start a self-compassion journey. If you're more interested in learning about self-compassion and self-kindness and self-care, I will leave down below links to Dr. Kristen Neff, who is probably the pioneer in self-compassion. Now I'm going to get into my tips on how I cultivated a relationship with self-compassion with myself, and maybe some of these might resonate with you. Their first 3 I would recommend doing in order, and the rest of them, the other 4, are things that you can interchange as you go. The first one is to become aware and to catch critical thinking. The purpose of this is to become aware of how often we are critical of ourselves, how often and what we are saying to ourselves. So we're just catching it. We're just becoming more present and more aware. I was listening to a podcast this morning actually about catching yourself when you're distracting and what you're trying to distract from. And I think it's actually a really good idea as well, just to become very aware of what you're doing and when you become self-critical. What are you thinking about yourself? What are you saying? What are you doing? What social scenarios are you in? Are you in a social scenario? Are you currently experiencing FOMO? What is it that you are telling yourself about yourself at that period of time? And why? We don't need to work out why. We just want to find out what are we doing and see how often we are critical about ourselves. And if you think about it, if you were living with your partner and you were consistently critical of every single action that they do, their morale would be quite low. So it's similar. It's the same for us. If we are the people who talk to us the most, I talk to myself the most out of anybody else. And my voice was so critical and so omnipresent that of course I felt beaten down and tired and, I had very little self-value, self-worth, self-respect. And that's because I had this constant negative self-talk. And when you start to actually analyze how long and how much you do that to yourself, how often am I actually saying these things? So the first thing is just becoming aware, just becoming present and thinking, okay, what did I just say? We don't need to analyze it yet. We're just becoming aware of how often and what we're saying. Step 2 is to actually begin to block that critical voice. So we can do a physical action that helps us to block. I have spoken about this in how I tackled binge eating disorder, and it's also very helpful, like tools that I use to help with binge eating disorder. And it's also very poignant for self-critical thoughts because it's a similar thing for me. The self-critical thought would trigger the need to escape my body, to use food as a comfort method. So for me, in order to start to stop that critical voice, I would actually block it. I find that blocking is a good first step in an intervention between the self-criticism, because we're not analyzing, we're not trying to discover the why. We're just doing something, putting an intervention in between the trigger of the voice and our acceptance of it. So becoming aware is your first step, and then your second step is blocking. So say you are at something that is, I'm going to use myself as an example. I used to be a charity manager and I ran a very, very successful event, a marketing campaign with an event, a public event, and it was incredibly successful. And at the end of it, while everybody was congratulating me, I was berating myself for tiny details and for my weight and the way that I looked. So standing there, everyone's telling you, that it's great. I go to the bathroom and I'm actually like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Like, what? You're stupid. They'll probably think you're like an idiot, or, there you are talking about this topic and about health and you're morbidly obese. What's wrong with you? So I could actually block that. And what you do is you literally have your hand and you block that thought. Not today. Not now. I'm not interested in listening to you. And if you're in a social situation where you can't actually physically block, so say you're at a party and somebody says something and you realize, you make a gaffe or you say something a bit silly, like we all do, and you don't understand you reply to a question, you realize you didn't actually understand the question, and you kind of feel like you sound a bit silly. And the critical voice, she starts to raise her head, or he starts to raise her head, and they're like, sorry, that was really stupid. What's wrong with you? You can literally just take a second, zone out, and feel your hand blocking. If you're not able to actually block it with your hand, not able to do the physical movement, you can block it. Another way to do it is see almost like a anti-missile device. I'm really not up to snuff on war or anything like that, thankfully. But what you can do is you can start to think of it as like, okay, so the critical thought is coming in, and in your mind, you can intercept that critical thought with a bomb of like, no, not going to listen to that today. You're just literally putting a stop, putting some kind of imagery or physical behavior between you and that critical voice. Tip number 3 then, after you've started becoming aware, you've started to block out thoughts, and what we can do as well is we can start to change that narrative. We can start to turn that narrative around into something more positive or something more neutral or something more true. Typically, that voice within our head is incredibly critical and is overly critical and is catastrophizing and is the worst case scenario and is really your biggest, harshest critic, and there's no necessity to do that. So what we can start to do is to reframe the critical voice and start to go, actually, no, sorry, I'm not, I don't, it sounds like we're talking to ourselves. We are talking to ourselves. We're not crazy, by the way. This happens. Say you make a mistake in work. Instead of berating yourself with it, say, okay, so your boss comes back and they're not happy with the report, and you have started to be like, of course, Carla, you're such an idiot. What's wrong with you? You can't get anything simple right. Start to reframe that thinking. Okay, my boss wasn't happy with the report. I'm going to see what I can do, see if I can change it a bit. The feedback doesn't necessarily mean that I'm an idiot. Maybe I got something wrong. I'm only human, so that's quite normal to get something wrong. I'll try again, or maybe this is an opportunity to try something else or to try a different way, a different approach, and to learn from that. Or maybe I can go back to my boss and I can have a chat. And I can say, I didn't really understand what you asked me. Perhaps you could help me to, understand a bit better. That's being a little bit more compassionate towards yourself. So you're starting to bring in a more compassionate voice and starting to speak to yourself as you would a friend, a sister, a lover, your husband, wife, your child, whomever it might be. So if your child comes home with a report card, that's really bad and really negative, we can go, you're an idiot, what's wrong with you? I'm like, okay, so you didn't do really well in maths. Is there a reason why you didn't do really well in maths? Is there something that we can do? Become more solution-based than negative-based. So you're starting to turn that critical into, because there's no point in being critical. Nothing is achieved from being critical except making yourself feel worse. So trying to find a way to make yourself feel just that little bit more human, more understanding, more compassionate, and change that narrative around so it's not as negative anymore. One example that I will use for myself is when I had postnatal depression after Brannock was born. I was about 2-3 weeks into it, and Vincent had to go back to work in person. And I was absolutely devastated. Now, I was on full-blown postnatal depression, and my sister tried an exercise with me that really helped, and all I wanted was Vincent back. I was completely irrational. There was no common sense with it. Like, I knew he was going to be coming back that evening. Everything was going to be fine, but I couldn't stop myself from being like just stressed and awful and crying. And she said to me, she tried to help me to reframe something which I think might resonate here. She said, well, you're missing Vincent. What does that tell you about yourself? It's like, well, it tells me that I love him. Yeah, that's one thing it tells you. It tells me that I love him, and that she said, try and figure out what's the beautiful thing that it says about you. And it's that you are a person to give love, and that you miss the person that you love. So instead of getting angry at myself for, being ridiculous or saying like, you're ridiculous, I know he's going to be okay. I'm like, okay, I understand. I have postnatal depression. And what my feelings are telling me is that I am a person who has a lot of love, and that I can love, that the person that I want to give my love to is currently not here, but he will be back and it'll be okay. So that's just trying to be more compassionate. So trying to be like my sister to myself is what I'm trying to do constantly. So if I got a rejection from a brand, a very, very big brand that wanted to work with me and then rejected me yesterday. And I got a bit, it was a bit of a downer, but I didn't beat myself up about it. I changed normally what my critical thinking would have been. You're stupid, your content isn't that great, you're not blah, 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 blah. Instead, I was able to go, okay, let's look at the truth in this situation. The engagement that they had originally noticed me on was when one of my videos went viral, and that virality has now come back down again to a normal pace. And they are worried about their investment, and that is a business transaction for them. And at the moment, they don't think I am a viable option for business. That's okay. That's their decision. It doesn't mean that I am not a worthwhile person, that the content that I create is not worthwhile. And it's just about reframing that. So instead of having that critical voice, and that does come, as I said, with practice, with a gradual practice, and that, these things are transient. And there are times when I can be like, that brand, like, well, of course that brand doesn't want to work with me, but I have to catch it. I have to block it. And I have to go, okay, no, I'm actually, I'm pretty shit hot. And eventually they will. And even if they don't, that's their loss. And it's really starting to turn that around into it doesn't always have to even be a positive, it just even to what is true. It doesn't need to be like this over positive. We are amazing, self-love, love yourself. It can just be, okay, that wasn't a good business decision for them right now. Okay, it's not great, but it's also not the worst thing on earth. So just reframing that thinking. So those are my three they are my three in order steps that I would recommend. So you're catching, you're blocking, you're reframing. Number 4 is to start to get to know yourself. And I understand that this might be a bit strange, but when I realized that I had incredibly negative self-talk, I also realized that I was telling myself consistent untruths and lies about myself. And I actually didn't really know myself that much. I wasn't really sure what I liked, what I wanted to do, what my life was. And so I needed to start to get to know myself. And by getting to know yourself, you start to understand who you are truly and authentically. And you start to be able to identify when that critical voice is actually the voice of somebody else, or some other cues that you've picked up, or whatever that critic is, whatever it is for you. I was able to once I started to learn who I am, that critic and the power that that critic had over me lessened. And I started to become much more round and much more able to go, no, I'm like, okay, what was that thought? Out you go. Block. Let's reframe. Let's keep going. We are ever evolving, and therefore our relationship with ourselves and our knowledge of ourselves is ever evolving. And what we are willing to put up with, and what our likes and our interests and everything else is going to change over time. It's going to change with social factors, with whatever's going on in the world at the time, whatever you're doing in your job, your love life, whatever it might be. You're going to have different influences that are going to change that. And it's really good to start to get to know yourself at this point. So for me, currently, things that I do that help me to get to know myself, and things that I did as well when I was starting this journey, included journaling. I'll leave a link to my video specifically on journaling up here. And, writing out my thoughts, doing my morning pages, and just like getting stuff out and understanding a bit more about my thought processes and where things came from. But even just getting things out and writing just started to help me to kind of understand patterns of thinking, understand who I am. Other things that you can do that can help you to get to know yourself are starting to date yourself. Take yourself out for lunch, for breakfast. I understand that dinner is one of those things that a lot of people I know don't like to do for themselves, is to go out to dinner by themselves. But it does, going out for breakfast, on a weekday, maybe before work, just taking yourself out for, an acai bowl or granola or a full Irish breakfast, whatever it might be that you want, stack of pancakes. Just having a bit of time to yourself and understanding, okay, what do I like? Treating yourself a little bit and kind of understanding, I'm going to treat myself to a massage because that's something that I really like about myself. And it starts to actually reaffirm it starts to reaffirm your self-worth and your self-value when you start to date yourself and give yourself time. One thing that helped me as well to start to learn more about myself and to start to get to know myself was to sit with zero distractions. We are incredibly addicted to our phones, to being distracted, to the TV, to our iPads, to our Netflix, TikTok, Facebook Reels. We can lose time. But sitting for 5 minutes with no distractions, you don't even need to meditate, just sitting there and seeing what comes up and what voices are coming up and what language you're talking about and what imagery is, it starts to get you to know about yourself and starts to give you the opportunity to get to know yourself and to get to know how you can, whatever you're thinking. Because you're not trying to distract yourself from whatever it is that you are thinking. And if you start to hear negative voices, you can start, not negative voices, it sounds like we're talking about schizophrenia. We're not. We're talking about, our inner critic. If you're starting to hear your inner critic raise their voice, okay, let's catch that, let's block that, let's reframe that. Or you can start journal on that. I noticed that I told myself that I was a piece of shit because I didn't get that promotion. Why did I say that I'm a piece of, maybe there's an external factor as to why I didn't get that job. Maybe there's another reason as to why I didn't get it. It doesn't always have to be me. And I think that's something as well as but anyway, I'm not going to get off track. But getting to know yourself, and another way to get to know yourself is to push yourself outside your comfort zone. And this can be something down the line that you can do. Tip 5 for creating a self-compassionate relationship with yourself is to become more grounded through meditation, mindfulness, and literal grounding techniques. When we are grounded, we are not in the kind of ethereal, running around the place. We are not present when we are not grounded, when we are not in our bodies, when we are not being mindful. And what happens is we tend to think from our younger brains. And what we want to do to make sure that we are grounded is that we are using our logical adult brain. Typically, the self-critic is an older person and you are the younger person inside, being given out to. You feel very small, you feel very, young and naive, or young and in trouble or something like that. Whereas what we want to do is to bring the adult to the forefront. So you want to bring your adult to engage in your logical brain. And the best way to do that is by grounding, by meditation, by becoming more mindful with yourself and creating that better relationship with yourself and being present. So one of the ways to do that, a very simple technique, I'll leave it linked up here, I've talked about in my binge eating disorder as well actually, is to make sure you can feel your feet. Literally make sure you can touch the ground, feel your feet, make sure you can feel the soles of your feet, rock your feet back and forth. And that just brings you back into your body, makes sure that you're using your logical brain. And you can start then to go, okay, no, hold on, wait 1 second. What was that voice? Or that voice might just quieten down completely, might just go away. Or you might be able to go, what was that thought? That was weird. Tip number 6 is to embrace your humanity. I want to remind you and to remind everybody else that we are human and that perfectionism does not exist. There is no such thing as a perfect being. We are not perfect. Nobody is perfect. And we will make mistakes, as everybody else on this planet will. When we start to embrace our common humanity, we start to understand that these things that we go through are normal. So maybe, it's chatting something out with your friend and seeing if they've had a similar experience and how they've dealt with it. A similar experience in work, with a lover, with somebody you met at a club, whatever it might be. If you are dealing with addiction, maybe it is a support group or something like that, or you're a carer, maybe it's a carer support group or a therapist. But just getting a little bit of perspective really helps to realize that what we might be critical about ourselves is actually something that's really common, and that we don't need to be critical to ourselves about it at all. And number 7, the final tip, is to practice gratitude. By becoming more grateful for what you and your body can do for you, what you've been able to achieve, what you've done in your life, you start to get a bit more perspective. You start to understand and come from a better, more positive, more loving place and appreciate what you have and what you're able to do. When I was losing weight at the start, I found it very difficult to stretch because my thighs were really, really big. That was where I carried some of the most of my weight, and I was very negative about them. And I would say to myself, your thighs are so thick, your thighs are so fat, what's wrong with you? Okay, that's unnecessary. That's not something that I need to listen to. Let's reframe that. How do I reframe that to be something more positive? Okay, well, what does it tell me? What beautiful thing does it tell me about myself that my thighs are thick? Well, they can carry me through the world. My thighs and my legs are quite sturdy, and they can carry this body that, I want to change, but this is the body I have right now, and this can help me to carry myself through the world. My thighs are thick and my thighs are fat, but they can actually, help me to walk. And by helping me to walk, they are helping me to attain the weight loss that I've always dreamt of. My thighs are fat, but they are also able to leg press 175 kg. That's pretty cool. That's a cool thing they're telling me about myself. I'm really grateful for my thighs, for what they've done for me in my life, and how they have carried me through, and how my body has supported me throughout my life until I was ready to make it my best friend. Does that make sense? That is catching, blocking, reframing, and being grateful. Does that make sense to you guys? Guys, this is the end of the video. I hope you have enjoyed it. Please, if you have got to the end, please leave me 3 hearts of your choosing, whichever color that you would like to. And if you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments down below. Please make sure you're subscribed. Turn on the notifications so you never miss a video. Come check me out on Instagram as well, and maybe on TikTok. I do a little bit on TikTok, not as much as I probably should, but c'est la vie. We've only got one brain, we've only got 2 hands, this is it's what we're working with at the moment. Guys, I will love you and leave you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please do not forget to show up for yourself. You are worth it. Bye, guys.